Okay, thank you very much for the introduction and the opportunity to come and speak today about ageism. It's an important topic and one that's receiving a lot more attention. Some of it is good that it's receiving attention, some is not so good because of the things that have been happening during the pandemic. Before I get into my presentation, I do want to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba campuses are located on Treaty 1 territory and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. So first off, I'm going to give you just a bit of background about ageism, a little bit on the history of it, definitions, and then I'm going to talk a fair amount about what we can do about it and what you as individuals can actually do about it, because this is something that if it isn't already, it should be a concern for all of us because it is a form of discrimination. So it is recognized that ageism can affect society in a variety of ways, and I'll go into some of those. And so there are many anti-ageism campaigns starting to happen around the world. And one of the main organizations that's working on this is the World Health Organization. And they brought out ageism as an issue both within their global strategy and action plan on aging and health. And it was in this huge document that they put out on aging and health in 2015. And it's also been part of the age-friendly environments conversation. And one of the main tenets of the world being age-friendly is that there should not be ageism. And here in Canada, the National Seniors Council, which you may or may not be familiar with, this is a federal government council made up of people, many of whom are older from across the country. And one of the areas that they're working on as a priority area is to counteract ageism. So what exactly is ageism? And how does this word come about? And interestingly, not all languages in the world actually have a similar term. So this term was coined in the US by Robert Butler, who was a scientist who started the National Institutes on Aging, or was the first lead of that organization. And so you can see that this came from a different time by the use of the word bigotry, which we don't normally hear. But this was when the term was first introduced in 1969. So a more lay definition that comes from a dictionary is prejudice or discrimination on the grounds of a person's age. And this is the World Health Organization's definition. So stereotyping, prejudice, discrimination towards people on the basis of age. Now, it is important to point out that for our talk today, and often people use ageism when they're talking about how it affects older people, but in fact, it could be for a person of any age. It could be someone who's younger, a child, someone who's middle age. So it doesn't have to be specifically about older people, but for the purposes of our conversation tonight, we'll be focusing on ageism and how it affects older people. So how is ageism different from other forms of discrimination? Well, one, it is hard to just compare it directly because, in fact, in this case, we actually all age, or if we're lucky, we all age. We're, in fact, almost discriminating against our future selves if we're discriminating against people who are older than we are. Largely, it's also quite socially acceptable right now to be ageist. And I'll get into some examples, but I think we can see it across our public society that there's lots of people who make ageist comments and no one seems to really care, or they think it's funny, in fact. And so we have a long ways to go in order to just build awareness that this is an issue, that this is a problem. With ageism, it can affect the way we think, feel, and act towards others, but also towards ourselves. And I'm going to get into that. So ourselves at the present time, not just in the future. So there are many different forms. I've given you a couple of different definitions of ageism, but there are many different forms. And so it can be quite complicated to think about ageism, and therefore it can be complicated to counteract ageism. So these are some somewhat academic type definitions, but hopefully we'll be able to make them clear to all of you. But if you have questions, by all means, you can ask. So there are implicit and explicit forms of ageism. So this means that the unconscious, so that's the implicit, we don't really know that we're even being ageist. And this would probably reside within all of us. So there's likely some form of implicit ageism in all of us, regardless of our age, because it is so ingrained in society. It's something that we, in essence, grow up with from a time when we're really young. So that would be the implicit or unconscious. So we don't even know that we're actually being ageist. The explicit is then, when someone says something very derogatory about an older person, they know they're saying that, they're consciously thinking it, and so that would be the explicit or conscious ageism. As I mentioned, there's this internalized or self-ageism. So that's, thinking about the way you yourself are at a particular age and holding notions that are, in fact, ageist. And I'll give you some examples of that later. There's interpersonal. So this could be the way individuals interact with other individuals, or it could be within social networks. And probably we could see lots of examples of this on social media. It could also be institutional. So it could be built into the policies of a government or of a company. So it can have a kind of a more systematic impacts that way. It can also be both positive and negative. So an example of positive ageism would be sageism, these authors point out. So thinking that because someone is older, they're therefore always going to be wise or know what's best. So that would be an example of positive ageism, when normally most forms of ageism are usually negative. They also point out that there can be cultural ageism, and so this can reside within comedy, also within mass media, movies, for example, how older people are actually portrayed. Benevolent ageism. This is where someone is trying to be overly protective. They're being paternalistic. They're trying to, help an older person, but that person could do whatever it is that they're trying to help them with. They could do it themselves. Or, for example, I've done a lot of research on driving. So a younger person thinking that someone is maybe not safe to drive and should drive them just because they're 80 years old or 90 years old, even though they might be quite capable of driving. And then there can be just outright hostile ageism, so being very negative or having very extreme views about older people. And I think probably many of you have heard some of the hostile viewpoints of people during the pandemic. Not so much in Canada, I would say, but in other countries around the world, we've heard politicians and others making comments that I would categorize as being quite hostile. So we now kind of have a sense of what ageism is. Well, what effects can it actually have? So for individuals, and there have been several reviews of the literature that have shown this now, there can be negative health outcomes. So this can be direct and indirect. So it could be, for example, that older people don't receive the same types of treatments as younger people because healthcare workers might not think that they really need them, but that they might not be very effective in them, even if they don't really know whether that's true or not. So it could be that, or it could be that the older person, for example, we're talking about, this is for Reh-Fit, people might underestimate what they can actually do, and maybe they think they shouldn't be really exercising or lifting weights or something like that. And so that could have a negative impact on their health because they're thinking that they really can't improve, or because they're old, they have pain and there's nothing they can do about that. And so it can really be limiting in that way. It can also be at that systematic level that I was talking about through institutions. There can be inappropriate policies and programs, or a lack of policies and programs with regards to older people. An example that we can see is that quite often there's exclusions of older people from research projects. So for no necessarily good reason, older people are excluded from studies. And a good example during the pandemic of this, one can only say it must have been an ageist decision, was you might recall the AstraZeneca vaccine. When they started testing it, one of the reasons it didn't get approved as early as some of the others is because they didn't test it in older people, or they had very few older people in their studies, which was quite shocking given the fact that the people that were affected directly the most by the virus itself were older people. So that was a bit puzzling, to say the least, as to why they didn't specifically recruit older people to test the vaccine. But that is an example, and it happens quite often. And in fact, some granting agencies are now putting in rules that say you have to include older people in studies of pharmaceuticals, for example. And there can also be big economic costs to society. So if older people aren't able to work, for example, and then they might become reliant on the state for their subsistence, that can be a big problem. And we're kind of on the job front, there's a bit of a catch-22. You'll see people talking about the fact that older people are staying in jobs too long and they're preventing younger people from getting into the job market. But then on the flip side, they're saying that, oh, we have too many older people and they're not working, and therefore they're relying upon the government. So there are many different effects of ageism, including on our society as a whole. And there's a whole piece of people talking about the longevity dividend, and we really need to be taking advantage of the fact that people are living decades longer than just 100 years ago. And as a society, we really haven't figured out how to do that very well. So let's get into some examples now of ageism. So as I was mentioning with the economic front, there certainly are many examples of workplace discrimination that occur. So that can be in training, so making assumptions about whether people are willing or able to learn new things on the job. Older people can be excluded from training programs that exist within companies or agencies. There are certainly lots of studies out there and many anecdotal examples about the fact that older people have a harder time getting hired for positions. And even when they've done studies and they've shown people the same resumes people, they just change the age, people are more likely to say that they would hire the person who on paper is younger, and that's the only difference between the resumes. And then there are examples as well of firings happening specifically on the basis of age. A really well-known case recently was IBM in the US. They had a very specific policy of trying to get rid of their middle-aged and older employees. And in fact, they lost a huge lawsuit and had to pay a lot of damages because of that policy. There are lots of examples. If you watch late night TV, particularly during the last election campaign, there were many jokes made about politicians being old and decrepit and etc. So there are many examples out there of comedians still being able to make jokes about people being older. And if you're interested, Bill Maher, a couple of weeks ago on his Friday night show, he has a really good clip about this fact that people perhaps shouldn't be so ageist, and giving the example of Joe Biden. So if you're interested in seeing a comedian talk about ageism, check out Bill Maher. Birthday cards, classic example of ageism. It's hard to find birthday cards for older people that aren't ageist in many cases. And there are companies I've seen that have started up to specifically come up with birthday cards that are not ageist because they're just so pervasively out there. Certainly, I think we could find lots of examples probably in this province where if you look at funding for younger people, there'd be lots more funding available than there is available for older people. So I think that exists even here in Manitoba, but I think you could go to some places in the world where they might not have laws against discrimination based on age, and there would be even bigger discrepancies. And I already mentioned about medical treatments being withheld. There was certainly lots of concern throughout this whole pandemic that people were going to receive or not receive medical treatment solely on the basis of age without considering any other aspects of the person's health status. And there were geriatricians in particular who were really calling out governments for making these policies. And then finally, again, I think we could say pretty clearly that the ways in which our systems treated long-term care during the pandemic could only be considered to be ageist. So what can we do to actually reduce ageism? So we'll start out with individual actions. What can we all do as individuals? Because this is so pervasive, it exists within all of us. So one is educating yourself and others about the facts on aging. We can try as best we can to avoid ageist jokes and birthday cards. We can try to, in our everyday language, avoid using ageist terms such as old coot. I don't think we hear that maybe so much, but I know one that we can commonly hear is people saying, I'm having a senior's moment, when maybe they don't remember something. Well, in fact, our memories don't get that poor as we get older. In fact, some aspects of our memory are quite good. And so it would be best if we don't say things like, I'm having a senior's moment, because that just lends itself to think about all older people as having poor memories, and that is in fact not true. We can try and avoid ageist language, any language that equates old age with sickness and senescence or deterioration, degeneration, having bad cognition, all of those kinds of things. And then specifically the opposite, equating youth with vigor and health, because of course we can have, there's lots of older people that are quite vigorous and also have good health. And even more so, if you really want to become an advocate, you can start writing letters to the editor. You could protest against ageist articles or policies and really become involved as an individual. And then, of course, if we do have an election and it seems like candidates have ageist ideas, then we can vote against those candidates. So what can we do more through organizations? So we can have public meetings, we can engage the media, and we can be trying to work with the media. I know this is something that's happened in Saskatchewan. They did a big campaign to try and make sure that the media was reducing its ageism and the way it was portraying stories. We can start petitions. There could also be class action lawsuits, like the example of IBM that I mentioned, to make sure that we're enforcing laws. So we do have laws in Manitoba and in Canada that prevent discrimination on the basis of age, but I'm not sure how many people are aware of that or how many people actually look into whether or not they can fight against something if they feel like they were specifically discriminated against for whatever reason based specifically on age. We can try and make sure that older people are voting, and that would include for those who are in long-term care institutions. And we can try and get other organizations engaged, so religious organizations, civic clubs, unions, etc. So some of the difficulties with taking these actions, whether it's individual or at the organizational level, is that we do need a lot more research. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the WHO and their campaign. They, throughout their report, talk about where we need more research. Although the term was defined, as I said, in the late 60s, really, we haven't paid a lot of attention to it or really thought about how critical it is for making our lives better as we get older. So we really do need to do a lot more work and a lot of facets to do with ageism, but is in particular on how to reduce ageism or not have it existing in our society. And because it is so pervasive in our society, it is going to be very challenging to have all of our mindsets changed. And so this will not be something that can happen quickly. This will be a slow cultural process to try and rid us of this ageism that does exist. Because as I said previously, even very small children hold ageist ideas, and we can probably take a look even at some of the media, whether it's videos that they're watching or the books that we read to children. They probably convey many ageist ideas in them. One thing that we need to be mindful of sometimes when we're trying to counteract ageism, we can enter into being ableist. And so we need to make sure we're not invoking ableism when we're trying to counteract ageism. So this would be when we're trying to say, well, there's lots of examples of older people who are, fantastic, and they can run marathons and they can jump out of planes and they're models. When that suggests that if you are not able to run a marathon, then you're somehow lesser of a person and you have diminished humanity. And so I think we've seen in particular with the long-term care scenario here, as well as other places, it leaves us with the thinking that not as much attention was placed on them because they thought that the people who were living there somehow had diminished humanity. So we do have to be careful that we don't enter into kind of ableist talk. Just a little bit on specifically how we communicate. The Frameworks Institute out of the US has done some research and come up with some recommendations about how we can convey messages and frame messages around aging to be more positive and to essentially have the appropriate outcomes, because sometimes the things that we think are the common sense things to do might actually have the opposite effect. So both for formal as well as everyday communication. And they have a whole toolkit if you're interested in looking into this. So they make some specific recommendations around the words we use to describe if we're talking about a group of older people, that we do use the terms like older persons or older people, because they found in their research that if we use words like elderly or senior citizen, that those words convey for the general public a sense of not being overly competent. And so we want to choose words that have a better connotation. We also want to avoid some common traps, and I don't really have a lot of time to get into these today, but I'll briefly mention each of these. And so the demography trap is if we're trying to convince people to do something like institute a program or a policy, we talk about it specifically because the population is aging, and that can really turn a lot of people off. Even if you're just telling a story or writing a newspaper article, people can say, oh yeah, that's awful, it's happening, we're gonna have a tsunami, I can't deal with this. And so they might not even read the rest of the article. And in fact, whether we have an increasing aging population or not, many of the things that we should do, we should just be doing them. We would never say we should be doing a program for children only because there's going to be more children. We wouldn't think that way. So we want to stay away from that. It certainly could be part of an argument, but it shouldn't be the main argument. Sympathetic seniors isn't just telling kind of sob stories about older people. That can also not be effective. And then there's the super senior that I mentioned before, because then that conveys to people, well, if there's some older people that are doing great, then the other people, it must be all their fault if they're not doing great. And why would we fund programs for them, for example? It's their own fault that they haven't aged well. And we know that there's lots of factors that come into play for aging, to do with, genes, the social circumstances in which people have lived their lives, et cetera. So these are some of the things to avoid. Something else is to try and use more language around we or as we are aging, these kinds of things, because we want to get away from this us and them kind of language, because when we start doing that, then we're kind of competing potentially for resources, et cetera. And we also want to avoid fatalistic language, because that, saying there's going to be a tsunami of older people. Well, what can you do about a tsunami? There's not really a lot you can do. And, by the way, the fact that we're aging should be celebrated. That shouldn't be seen as being a disaster. Also, it's important to not spend a lot of time trying to mention myths and trying to counteract them, because research has actually shown that people remember the myths even more than they did to begin with. And then they suggest framing messages according to narratives that they tested. And one is just from a social justice perspective, we should be doing things for older people, that we do have ingenuity as a society to make things better for all of us as we age, and that we can build on the momentum that people have gained as they've lived their lives. As I alluded to, the World Health Organization launched a campaign to combat ageism, and this just came out in March of this year. So they have a big report that they put out, and it has all the latest evidence on this topic, which certainly has gained a lot more attention during the pandemic. The pandemic did not start ageism, it just made it quite obvious that it exists. They also have many tools on their website. They want to hear about what people are doing. So if you decide to take on something within your own organizations or with your own circle of friends, you can let them know. This is the website where you can look at all of these things, and they do have a hashtag for those of you that use hashtags that exists. So just a few things from it. Here's a couple of examples of social media posts, and they do have things both about younger people as well as older people in this specific campaign. A couple more here. And then I'm just going to leave you with one aspect of the campaign, and it's about initiating conversations about ageism. So they're encouraging people to have conversations with whom they would like you to have conversations with: friends, family, employers, colleagues, students, grandchildren, policymakers. So everybody should be having conversations about ageism. If it's a cultural thing that affects all of us, that's within all of us, then we need to all be talking about it. They have a whole range of questions. If you can't think about how to initiate these conversations yourself, then you can take a look at that resource. Why should we have these conversations? Well, as I mentioned, this is affecting all of us in society, and this is the way we can transform things, by actually making people aware of it. One, because a lot of people don't think it's really even a thing. They don't really know that it exists. They've never necessarily really heard the term. So we need to make people aware, and then also let them reflect and think about these things and maybe change the way in which they're thinking and doing. And you could use prompts like birthday cards, or you could, things that you might have seen on TV or in a movie or you read in a newspaper. You could use those things to start up conversations about ageism. And as I mentioned, there is a whole document actually specifically on initiating conversations about ageism within these various contexts, because of course the conversation that you might have with an employer might be quite different than the conversation you might have with friends or family. So just some contact information. I'll just let you know that if you are interested in hearing more about the Center on Aging, we do have events on a regular basis. You can by all means send us an email and get on our email list, or you can check out our website. It's just a brand new website for us. The university's all gone to new templates, so we have a brand new website with lots of information there. And with that, I will be happy to answer questions that you might have.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. That was a great presentation. I know a lot of good information that I think I probably am aware of, but when you put it into context of all the different areas that ageism is brought out, then yeah, you kind of sit back and go, well, yeah, it's really everywhere, and we have to do a much better job of making sure that the way we speak and the way we market and the way we offer programming and everything is reflective of the populations and the importance of everybody. So if anybody has a question, again, you can use the chat box. I usually trying to come up with a couple, but in all reality, I was thinking of all the information you gave, and I really just want to explore some of the websites that you provided, because I think I need to give myself a little bit more education on that and starting those conversations. I
can maybe put the websites in the chat box. Would people?
Sure, yeah. And for those of you, you can always view this talk again. It'll be on our Reh-Fit Anywhere. So if you're an active member, you have access to that. It is also on our Facebook Live. but Michelle can put some of the websites and contacts in the chat box. So if you can see them, you can quickly jot them down if you wanted to look them up later. Probably going to the U of M website too, you'll get a lot of links through that Center on Aging. So if that's something you want to look at, we've got lots of reading and lots of learning to do in the next little while. And the plus side is there's not much to do. So we have lots of opportunities to do things. So I'm just going to check the chat box. I think most of them are from Michelle. I don't know if anybody has a question or comment. For those of you that joined us tonight, I just want to say thank you so much. I hope everybody is doing well. We miss you, and hopefully we see you soon. So there is one comment here, Michelle. Some medical tests important to women are no longer offered at a certain age. The person has to insist with her doctor to continue having some tests. A friend of mine insisted on mammograms and found she had breast cancer. We have to advocate for ourselves. So that's a good statement. I don't know if you want to elaborate.
Yeah, certainly. I don't know a lot specifically on that front, but yes, just in general, sometimes physicians are not willing. I know in some cases there are some genuine age-based reasons for why they do things, but in a lot of cases there aren't. And so, yeah, always we need to be advocating for ourselves, informing ourselves, making sure we're getting the most appropriate treatment. But I think, if I think of someone that I had come and talk to my class once about, she was worried about falling, and basically her doctor just told her, oh well, use a cane. That was kind of the instead of sending her for an assessment or for potential treatment, it was like just a very simple, like maybe you should get a cane, which obviously does not seem appropriate. And certainly within the WHO, their global strategy and action plan on aging and health, we should be trying to do everything we can, which is great. All the things that you do at Reh-Fit, you do have a very specific falls prevention program. Like those are the kinds of things that we need to be doing. And I'm not sure, how often those things are recommended for people, particularly when people are in their 70s and 80s. How often are people really thinking about older people being able to be rehabilitated in a physical way? So yes, we certainly do need to make sure that we're advocating for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard of that same scenario, but on the flip side, that the tests aren't typically offered until you're a certain age. And I've had individuals that I've known that were much younger than that and, ran into the same scenario because they were too young, which is also an ageism thing. So if anybody else has any other comments or questions, you can ask them here. If you think of something later, you can post it on our Facebook page, or you can contact myself at the Reh-Fit, or you can use any of the contacts that you have here, and I can relay the message on to Dr. Porter, or if it's something regarding.
Also give you my
you can give your contact.
Or we could also maybe does anybody have any examples that they want to share? I mean, and I guess we're a small enough group. I'm just seeing that there's just one screen of us. I suppose if somebody wanted to turn on their microphone and say something, we probably have enough time for that. If you had a quick comment.
Oh, Joyce has a comment. Go ahead, Joyce.
So my favorite sort of thing around sort of ageist language in the media was there was a robbery happened to a woman who was 72. I think it was a home invasion or something. They kept referring to this woman as elderly. Now she's standing right next to the reporter, but she keeps referring to her as being really elderly and really, she's debilitated, and, this robbery, it wasn't about the robbery or justice for this woman. All he kept emphasizing was elderly. He must have said it was a clip about a minute long, and he must have said it 10 times in that clip. And it just made set my teeth on edge. And the other comment.
Definitely, that's one thing that we try and do as a center. We actually, now when we have when we have people submit grant applications, when we have people do poster presentations, we very specifically tell them you cannot use the word elderly, because unfortunately it's in a lot of the medical literature. You do see it in the paper and on the news all the time, and it really does have a very specific connotation to people, that the person is frail regardless of whether they're frail or not. It's just a word that's used for over a certain age, and depending probably on the journalist's age, that will vary.
Well, I just thought it was funny because I think he was in his 40s, so I don't think, he's not that far removed from that age, and it was just so weird. But I just also wanted to quickly say that the other group that has a kind of a double whammy is people who have dementia. So they have ageism and they have the stereotypes around what people with dementia are like. So that's kind of my other place.
Right.
So the two things together, people seem to feel that the person who has dementia somehow did it to themselves or whatever. And that's not accurate either. So.
Right, the stigma associated with dementia. And I know that's something that I think I've seen recently. Alzheimer's societies are trying to convince, like comedians again, don't be making these very derogatory type jokes about cognitive impairment, because it only is going to increase the stigma for people that are going through it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Michelle. I think everybody's maybe had a chance to think about some of their comments. I think we're all going to take some time in the next few days and look up some of those websites. Oh, do you have a question, Miriam? You can unmute yourself if you like.
There we go. It's just sort of a comment. I've been volunteering at a nursing home, and makes me emotional. I've been helping a woman with lunch. She's 104.
Wow.
Yeah, and well, she just sort of sits and I feed her, but it's quite sobering to see all the people and how sometimes they're talked down to. And I look at her, I guess I sort of think of my mom, and I look at her and I try and talk to her like I would speak to a peer. She doesn't really respond, but sometimes she surprises me. Mm-hmm. And I talk to her like she's a peer, and I don't know, instead of treating her like she's stupid, because I don't know what's going on in her head, she might just be too tired to talk. Mm-hmm. That's what I like to think. But it's interesting just working in that environment and just seeing how people are treated, how they act, how they, I don't know. It's just interesting dealing with people who are that much older, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, we certainly, within a lot of different professions, there can be a need for a lot of work around ageist ideas and the ways that people are treated. And certainly within the WHO report, they specifically cite long-term care and how older people there are talked to and treated.
Mm-hmm. There was I don't know what, I've seen it several times, and maybe all of you, it's an ad campaign. I'm not even sure what they're advertising. But it's an individual looking in a mirror who's older, and the reflection they see back is them, in their career. So maybe it's an older woman or an older gentleman looking in the mirror, and what you see is that older person, but what they see is maybe they were a police officer or a teacher or and they identify as that, and that's how we should see them, right? And that's how we should look at everybody. So I know in my very young years, I'll say I'm not that old, but I'm getting there. I'm always intrigued to find out what did the individuals do, what's their career, what's their interests, and I love connecting with people that way. So yeah, I think getting kids involved in personal care homes and start them early and get them to be comfortable and have conversations with all ages and all abilities, I think that's key. So I'm always happy when my kids report that they get to go to any kind of personal care home and interact and kind of get an understanding of everybody at all ages and abilities.
Right. That's one way in which the WHO and others talk about that we can also, I really didn't have a lot of time to get into all the different ways in which we can counteract ageism, but we tend to be fairly age segregated in society. And so we need to have more opportunities for intergenerational interactions. And that would go a long ways to combat ageism, both at both ends of the spectrum. There's a lot of ageist ideas about younger people. I don't know if you saw the story about the building in the Edmonton that was caught on fire. Just happened, I think it was on Friday. It was, I think it was a supportive housing for older people, and it caught on fire, and it seemed like the fire really took off. And there were these teenagers that saw the smoke and they're like, oh, we should go and help. And so these 3 young teenage guys that most people would probably say derogatory things about them, actually went in and helped to get people out of the building, and nobody asked them to do it. They just did it, and they thought it was the right thing to do, and they don't think they're heroes. And it was such a great story to see that.
Yeah, that's great. There's lots of really good examples, and that's really hopeful that, you know, things will start to change, and education and just sharing events like this would be a good way to educate everybody on ageism. So I am going to wish everybody a good night. We are going hopefully enjoying the weather. Next week, Tuesday, I've got my sheets in front of me this time, more prepared. May 18th, we have Dr. John Dukas joining us, and he's going to be talking about heart attacks. So what exactly is a heart attack? Do women present differently than men? How do you know you're having one? Anything that you wanted to know. He's a great wealth. He has a vast experience in cardiology in our province and in our city, Winnipeg. So we're very fortunate to have him. So he will be next Tuesday. A huge thank you to Dr. Michelle Porter. That was a great presentation. Small group, but I think a great group you guys had. I had nice to see everybody's faces. We had great conversations. I can't emphasize enough how much we miss you at the Reh-Fit. We're really hoping this is just 3 weeks and we see you back right away. So have a great evening, everybody. Good night.
Thanks. Bye.
Good night.